Getting into Rolex collecting can be daunting. There's a lot of collectors out there with incredible collections. There's also just a huge history that Rolex has with so many different references, so many different variations, and it's hard sometimes to kind of sift your way through and figure out how you want to kind of start on your journey of Rolex collecting. Today we're going to be talking about two references or two models that would be watches that I would consider for you if you are looking into getting into watches. There's really great documented history on both of these references, and they're great watches that you can enjoy having on your wrist and talking with collectors about. The two watches I'm going to be looking at is a Rolex Datejust. The reference that I have today is the 1601, but I think all models for the Rolex Datejust are great ways to get into Rolex collecting, and you can have a really cool collection of just Rolex Datejusts. And the second watch that we're going to be looking at is the Rolex Explorer 2. The reference that I have today is the reference 16570. This one is from the early I think 2000. The Datejust is from 1968. And as I mentioned, I think these two references are great ways of getting into Rolex collecting. I will be showing you these watches in the metal so you can take a look at them, and also discussing their histories through a great resource that I'd recommend if you are getting into Rolex collecting. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Becoming a Rolex collector can often be daunting with the amount of models that are out there. And to be honest, when you meet Rolex collectors, it can sometimes also be intimidating because they do most of the time have some very interesting pieces. Today I have a Rolex Datejust and a Rolex Explorer 2 that I would like to discuss as a really great way to enter into collecting Rolex watches. Now, these are very different watches at very different price points, and so I know that I mentioned that this is a good way to start your Rolex collection, but I still believe that even though they are different types of watches and different price points, this is a good place to really start. Now, one of the things that I've covered on the channel is the book underneath here, and I'd like to actually go to the pages where they describe the Rolex Datejust and the Rolex Explorer 2, just briefly, so that you can see why having a book like this is an extremely useful thing to have when you're researching watches that you'd like to collect. So I'm going to put these watches over to the side really quickly and go into the watch book Rolex, which this is the updated and extended edition by Brunner. This has a really great history of the brand, and I'd like to go through with you. So we're going to go to page 88 to quickly look at sort of the history of the Rolex Datejust, which is right here. So the Rolex Datejust was actually originally released in 1945 to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the company. He wanted to combine three fundamental achievements from the history of the brand, which was the watertight oyster case, which you can see here in some of these pictures, a movement that could wind itself via rotor, so an automatic movement, and the chronometer certification that they were chasing for a lot of this time. So you see some nice examples here on the side. I'll zoom into this one here. A really nice example of an early Datejust that was released by the brand. And so the Rolex Datejust obviously celebrates three key components of Rolex, as well as the 40th anniversary of the brand that is so loved today. I'll now quickly flip over to the Explorer 2 section to quickly give a brief overview of that as well. And that's going to be on page 180. So the GMT complication obviously was used much more recently than when the Rolex Explorer 2 first debuted. But what Rolex debuted the Explorer 2 in 1971, and had basically the traditional timekeeping philosophy that they used here, but what they did was they had added this second hour hand to have a second time zone. The first one that was debuted, which you can see right here on the right side of the page, was the reference 1655 with a 39mm case, black dial, and this really distinct orange second hand. This obviously is a coveted watch by collectors, and is one is a phenomenal example of what they're able to achieve. So again, I recommended it when we sort of looked at this book together, but I highly recommend checking out this book so that you can learn about Rolex if you are interested in them, and have a nice reference for when you're looking at these pieces. So I have two watches on the table here. I'm going to go over each of them, why I think is a great place to start if you are getting into Rolex collecting. I'll start with the Datejust because I think this is probably probably one of the most iconic watches that Rolex has ever produced. This specific example that I have is a Rolex Datejust reference 1601. It's from 1968 according to the serial numbers, and has this stainless steel case, gold bezel with a champagne dial and gold applied hour markers. It's 36 millimeters in diameter. When I'm talking about a good place to start with Rolex collecting, you don't have to go necessarily for a 1601. There are many other references that Rolex has produced. Even their modern Datejusts are really great. So I recommend you researching them, but I think this is a good place to start because it's everything that you would want in a Rolex, which is exactly what Hans Willdorf wanted when he released this watch all those years ago. It celebrates the oyster case, the automatic movement, and the chronometer certification that these pieces get. So the reason why I love the Rolex Datejust and I would recommend it is it's 36. This one is 36 millimeters. It's extremely wearable. The modern Datejusts are a little bit larger, but they are still extremely wearable on the wrist. 1, 2, it has a large historical significance for the brand Rolex. 3, because it has this oyster case, you can kind of go between wearing this in a more dressier setting and also in a sportier setting. You can wear this with jeans and a sweater, but you can also wear this with a suit and it would look just as good. Many people are afraid of wearing two-tone. Most Datejusts from this era, at least the 1601s you'll find on the market, are typically this two-tone pattern, but there are some that have this steel case with a steel bezel. So the variety is out there for sure for you to find some. There's also a lot of documented history about the 1601s, which can be helpful, especially when you're looking when you're doing sort of initial research on a possible watch that you want to buy. It's very easy to research them and then identify if the watch that you're looking at is in good condition and there's nothing sort of wrong with it. So that is the Rolex Datejust, why I would recommend it. Now, if you compare it to the Rolex Explorer 2, it is going to be a little bit less expensive, which is another attractive quality of this watch. I'll scoot this camera over just to take a look at the Explorer 2 now, which you see next to the Rolex. As I mentioned, the Rolex Explorer 2 was debuted in 1971. There are many variations of the Rolex Explorer 2 that have been released over the years. The watch that you're looking at is a very common reference that collectors sort of lean towards. This is the reference 16570, or the 16570. This is a reference that came with black dials and white dials. The version that you're seeing here has a black dial. It's a 40 millimeter stainless steel cased watch. This is a K serial version of the Rolex Explorer 2, so it's from 2000 approximately. And major differences, if you compare them, I mean, you can kind of see it already when you have them side by side. Is the case is a little bit larger. The case is a little bit larger, 40 millimeters instead of 36 millimeters, which is significant for people who find themselves. I apologize for the focus here. Give me 1 second so I can get this thing in focus for you. There you go. 40 millimeters is a little bit larger, and size of the case can be an important factor, especially if your wrists are your wrist size sort of determines the watches that you're wearing. I have a smaller wrist, so I feel like I can pull off a 36mm cased watch, but I also can pull off a 40mm cased watch. You can see if you wear this, if you put it on your wrist, it wears larger than the Datejust for sure. Let me get the focus again, apologize. Wears larger on the wrist than the Rolex Datejust, but still looks really nice. I have a smaller wrist and I can kind of wear both. And so yeah. Back to sort of describing why I think this is a great watch. One, it has a pretty interesting complication where you can have those 2 time zones. It doesn't have the bezel that moves, but still has that second time zone, which is really awesome. You have your date complication, which is great, and having that third hour marker, hour hand, which you can see here in red, is a nice little added touch. It's an oyster case. I don't think this can really go into the dressier side of things, but I guarantee that there's probably someone out there who can pull it off. It fits really nicely, relatively well proportioned, and is a nice piece. Now, as I mentioned, this piece is going to be a little bit more expensive than a Rolex Datejust. These are definitely more expensive than 1601s, but you get a complication, you get everything that kind of is about Rolex, so oyster case, chronometer certification for the movement, great history, and a pretty cool complication. In my mind, these 2 watches can be a really great start at a Rolex collection because of the versatility of them as well. As you can see, I've got the Datejust on a leather strap, the Oyster Perpetual on the Oyster bracelet. You can very easily take this the Oyster bracelet off and put a rubber strap on it, or if you're feeling that way, a leather strap as well. Oyster Perpetuals, Datejust look great on both leather and on Jubilees or an Oyster bracelet. And so I think these are 2 really great watches to consider if you are getting into collecting Rolex. Hope you enjoyed taking a look at the 1601 and the 16570. As I mentioned, getting into Rolex collecting can be daunting, but hopefully this helped you kind of understand a direction you could go and watches that you could explore as you go on your journey. Hope you enjoyed taking a look at the Rolex Datejust 1601 and the Rolex Explorer 2 reference 16570. I think both of these watches are great places to start your Rolex collecting journey. Rolex Datejusts, especially the 1601, getting into vintage watches can be daunting, but again, there's a really great documented history of the Datejust that'll allow you to sort of learn and also buy with confidence if you are looking to get a 1601. But as I mentioned, the modern versions of the Rolex Datejust are just as great. And the Explorer 2s the Explorer 2 is the same exact way. Great history that's documented, and a phenomenal watch that you can enjoy for yourself. I'll leave a link in the description to our website if you want to read the editorial that we've written for this video. You can go to the editorial section of our website to check that out. Let me know in the comment section below what you would go for, if you'd get a Rolex Datejust or you'd get a Rolex Explorer 2. I know they're different price points, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, if you have a suggestion for other watches to begin a Rolex collection with, I highly recommend putting them in the comment section below, because you will be helping out some collector who might be stumbling upon this video. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to us and share this video with a friend who might be interested in watches. If you wouldn't mind liking this video, it really does help me out. With that said, guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time.